Hey everyone, back again for today's Take 5, and today we're looking at the next chapter of Acts, where we're kind of moving into Acts 15 now, where we kind of find Paul and Barnabas. After all of what's gone on, they've returned home. They've gone back to their hometown of Antioch in Syria, and they're starting to do some work with the church that they had made there. And one of the things that they're trying to do in this passage is that they're really trying to unpack a disagreement of opinions, a disagreement of beliefs, that, to be honest, had this been managed poorly, it could have actually collapsed or split the early church, in my opinion anyway. But what really stood out to me in this passage, as I was kind of going for it myself, was the fact of how they responded. That's what really stood out to me. When there was a big question and they weren't sure what they were going to do with it, it's how they responded to that. So I'm just going to share a little bit about how they kind of went through their decision making and what stood out to me. And so, when we're thinking about decision making, like in the everyday sense, it's like, whether we're at home or we're at work, especially in the small stuff, the way that we usually make decisions, I feel, is kind of usually based upon simplicity, isn't it? It's usually about logic. Oh, how are we going to do that? Oh, let's do it this way because that makes the most sense. Or it could be financially driven. It could, about money. So it could be, oh, actually, we can't do this because we don't have the money, or we can do this because we have this provision. Or it can be emotionally driven, can't it? A lot of times we get decisions and choices to make that lead us to just be emotionally driven to make a decision quickly about something. But here, all of those things probably would have been involved. They did need to be logical. There was going to probably be some financial implications to what they were saying, particularly about what things that they were doing, right? And also they would have been emotionally charged and like spiritually and emotionally kind of driven in how they would respond to this. And that's why there was this division about the way that they were looking at this disagreement they were having, right? But what they did was so interesting, because they just paused and then they slowed down and they went back to reflecting on actually what had God done previously. And then then they were kind of prayerfully discerning, God's will, and trying to move it forward together as a group in unity. And that's what really stood out to me. And I was just like, wow. They found themselves with this really difficult question, and instead of being like rash or prideful, which we so often do, don't we? Especially when we think we're right. I remember there was a guy, what did he say? I can't remember I'm probably going to really butcher this, but there is a guy, I can't remember if it was a podcast I listened to or something I watched once or something I read, and I just never left me. He said this. He said, "Your ego is not your amigo." And it's so true, isn't it? Like, it's so many times when we're trying to have a conversation and we disagree about something, the ego is so quick to get in the way, and that's the flesh, right? That is the flesh. But here, Paul and Barnabas and the elders of the church, they choose to be humble and to not let their ego and pride get in the way. They listen well to each other, but more than that, they trust that God was in the process. And so for us, we have to be able to do that too, don't we? As good believers, as people who want to imitate Jesus, we've got to be able to reorientate our own posture of decision making, even in the small stuff. And I can be really bad at that. I can be really bad at just going, right, this is a logical answer to this. This is how I should move this forward. Or sometimes I can be emotionally driven, particularly when it's about my own kids. But we need to be kind of getting ourselves into that posture of going, how does God want me to answer this? How does God want me to work through this? And we kind of really have to push against going against the flesh, don't we? Which wants its control. The flesh wants control, but God's asking us to pause, to look at Him, and to draw and lean into Him, into His life-giving word. Particularly about, if you didn't listen to the sermon, which would have been a week or so ago where actually Kevin shared about how do we hear from God, and one of those ways that he spoke about was actually like drawing into his word, reading his word. You know, we need to be doing that to allow the Holy Spirit to be able to reveal actually how we might discern and move forward in that. So that was my kind of throw out to you guys today, is maybe I wonder if we can adopt this practice in the decisions that we make today. Lean into God, actually listen to how he would want us to respond and how he might want us to handle the decisions of our day. So just to be discerning in all things and to trust that God is in the process. So I just give that out to you guys, maybe pray into some of the big decisions that you might be making, but also to really give those small decisions to God as well today and see what God does in the process, see what he reveals to you. And I'd love to hear some of your stories if he does some cool stuff. And I'll catch you tomorrow.